Ethan Caldwell was not your ordinary billionaire. At just 29 years old, he had built an empire from scratch, turning a small tech startup into a global powerhouse that revolutionized how people interacted with technology. Everyone admired him, his confidence, his sharp mind, and his ability to turn any challenge into an opportunity. But beneath the polished exterior of tailored suits, luxury cars, and penthouse views, Ethan carried a weight no one could see. It all started 2 years ago when his wife, Clara, began feeling unwell. At first, it seemed like nothing serious. Fatigue, occasional dizziness, maybe stress from their busy lives. But as weeks turned into months, her symptoms worsened. Doctors ran test after test, but no one could pinpoint what was wrong. Finally, they delivered the devastating news. Clara had an aggressive autoimmune disease, one so rare and complex that even the world's top specialists were unsure how to treat it. For someone who prided himself on solving problems, this was unbearable for Ethan. Money couldn't fix everything, and for the first time in his life, he felt truly powerless. He poured millions into research, consulted experts around the globe, and tried every experimental treatment available. Yet, despite his best efforts, Clara's health continued to decline. Each failed attempt left him more frustrated, more desperate, and more broken. One cold, rainy evening, Ethan sat beside Clara's hospital bed, holding her frail hand in his. Her once vibrant eyes now looked tired, her laughter replaced by silence. The machines around her beeped steadily, a reminder of how fragile life could be. Ethan leaned forward, resting his forehead against the edge of the bed, tears streaming down his face. He whispered promises he wasn't sure he could keep, that he would find a way to save her, no matter what it took. When visiting hours ended, Ethan stepped out of the hospital, his heart heavy with grief. The rain soaked through his coat, but he didn't care. He walked aimlessly, letting the storm mirror the turmoil inside him. The city streets, usually alive with energy, felt eerily quiet. Neon lights reflected off puddles, casting distorted colors onto the pavement. For the first time in years, Ethan didn't know where he was going, or if there was even a point to moving forward. As he wandered deeper into unfamiliar territory, the towering skyscrapers gave way to crumbling buildings and dimly lit alleys. This part of the city was far removed from the glitz and glamour Ethan was used to. Here, people huddled under makeshift shelters, trying to escape the biting cold. Street vendors sold cheap snacks to passersby, and children played barefoot in the rain. It was a stark contrast to the world Ethan inhabited, yet something about it drew him in, a raw honesty he hadn't encountered in years. That's when he saw her. Sitting alone on the curb, wrapped in tattered clothes, was a young girl. She couldn't have been older than 16, her face smudged with dirt, but her eyes sharp and piercing. There was a quiet strength about her, a resilience that caught Ethan's attention. As he approached, she looked up at him, studying him with an intensity that made him pause. In that moment, Ethan realized she wasn't just another face in the crowd. Something about her presence told him she might hold the answers he'd been searching for, or at least offer a perspective he desperately needed. The young girl sitting on the curb didn't flinch as Ethan approached. Her gaze remained steady, almost unnervingly so, as if she could see right through him. For a man who had spent his life commanding attention and respect, it was unsettling to feel so exposed in front of someone who seemingly had nothing. No wealth, no status, no power. Yet there was something about her that intrigued him. Maybe it was the way she carried herself, with a quiet confidence that seemed out of place in this part of the city. Or maybe it was the flicker of understanding in her eyes, like she knew what it meant to carry a burden too heavy to bear. Ethan hesitated for a moment before speaking. "You're out here alone?" he asked, his voice soft but tinged with curiosity. The girl nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. "What's your name?" he continued, crouching down to meet her at eye level. "Mia," she replied, her tone calm but guarded. She studied him for a few seconds longer before adding, "And you look like someone who's lost everything." Her words hit him like a punch to the chest. How could she possibly know? He hadn't said a word about his struggles, yet somehow she had seen straight through him. It was as though she recognized the weight he carried, the exhaustion etched into his face, the sadness lingering in his posture. Most people saw only the billionaire, the larger-than-life figure who seemed untouchable. But Maya saw the man beneath the facade, the one who felt utterly defeated. Feeling an unexpected urge to confide in her, Ethan took a deep breath and began to speak. "My wife, she's very sick," he admitted, his voice trembling slightly. "We've tried everything. Doctors, treatments, specialists. But nothing works. I don't know what else to do." As the words spilled out, he realized how long it had been since he'd spoken honestly about his fears. To his friends, he always played the role of the strong, unshakable leader. But here, in this desolate corner of the city, he found himself opening up to a stranger, a street girl who probably didn't even know his name. To his surprise, Maya didn't respond with pity or empty reassurances. Instead, she listened intently, her sharp eyes never leaving his face. When he finished speaking, she tilted her head thoughtfully. "There are other ways to heal," she said finally, her voice low but firm. "Not everything can be fixed with machines and medicine." Ethan frowned, unsure of what she meant. "What do you mean?" he asked cautiously. Mia hesitated before answering, as if weighing whether or not to trust him. "My grandmother," she began, "was a healer. People came from all over to see her when doctors couldn't help them. She used herbs and rituals passed down through generations, things most people have forgotten about. Some called her a witch, but she saved lives." For a moment, Ethan was silent, processing her words. He wanted to dismiss the idea outright. After all, he was a man of science and logic. But desperation clawed at him, gnawing away at his skepticism. If there was even the slightest chance Mia was telling the truth, if her grandmother's methods could offer hope where modern medicine had failed, wasn't it worth exploring? "And you think these remedies might work for my wife?" he asked, his voice tinged with both hope and doubt. Mia shrugged, her expression neutral. "I don't know for sure. But I do know that sometimes the answers we need aren't found in hospitals or labs. Sometimes they're hidden in places we least expect." Her words lingered in the air, planting a seed of possibility in Ethan's mind. He glanced at her again, noticing the faint scars on her hands and the weariness in her smile. Whatever hardships she had endured, she still carried a glimmer of faith in her grandmother's wisdom, in the resilience of the human spirit, and perhaps in the idea that miracles could happen when all seemed lost. Without fully realizing it, Ethan felt a shift within himself. For months, he had been trapped in a cycle of despair, clinging to the belief that money and technology would save Clara. But now, standing in the rain with a girl who had nothing yet radiated strength, he began to wonder if salvation could come from something far simpler and far more profound. Ethan's mind raced as he processed Mia's words. A healer, ancient remedies. It all sounded so far-fetched, the kind of story he would have dismissed outright in his old life, the one before Clara got sick. But now, standing there in the rain with a street girl who seemed to carry the weight of the world on her shoulders, Ethan found himself willing to entertain the impossible. Desperation had a way of loosening doubts and opening doors that logic would normally keep shut. "Tell me more," Ethan said finally, his voice tinged with urgency. "About your grandmother. What did she do? How did she help people?" Mia hesitated again, her fingers absently tracing patterns on the damp concrete. She seemed unsure whether to trust him, but something in Ethan's tone must have convinced her. Slowly, she began to speak, her voice soft but steady. "She didn't just treat symptoms," Mia explained. "She believed illness came from imbalances, not just in the body, but in the mind and spirit too. She used herbs, yes, but also rituals. Things like chanting, meditation, even connecting with nature. People thought it was strange, but they came anyway because nothing else worked." As Mia spoke, Ethan listened intently, hanging on to every word. He pictured an elderly woman, weathered by time but brimming with wisdom, moving gracefully between patients, mixing potions, and whispering prayers. It was hard to imagine such a figure existing in today's fast-paced, technology-driven world. And yet, the image felt oddly comforting, like a relic from a simpler time when humanity relied on instinct and intuition rather than machines and algorithms. "You really think this could work?" Ethan asked, his skepticism still lingering but fading with each passing second. "For someone like Clara." Mia met his gaze squarely, her eyes unwavering. "I can't promise anything," she admitted, "but I've seen my grandmother cure things doctors said were incurable. If you're serious about saving your wife, maybe it's worth trying something different." Her honesty struck a chord within him. There was no false hope in her words, no attempt to sugarcoat the uncertainty. Just raw truth, delivered with a quiet confidence that made Ethan believe, for the first time in months, that there might actually be a path forward. "I want to try," Ethan said firmly, surprising even himself with how quickly he'd made up his mind. "But I need your help. Will you guide me?" Mia raised an eyebrow, clearly taken aback by his request. "You're asking me?" she asked, incredulous. "Why would you trust a stranger, a street kid, with something this important?" Ethan paused, considering her question. Why did he trust her? Maybe it was the sincerity in her voice or the conviction in her eyes, or maybe it was simply because he had nowhere else to turn. Whatever the reason, he knew in his gut that Mia wasn't lying. She genuinely believed in what she was saying, and that alone gave him hope. "I don't have a choice," Ethan replied honestly. "If you know something that could save Clara, then yes, I'm trusting you. Please, Mia, help me." For a long moment, Mia stared at him, weighing his plea. Then with a small nod, she agreed. "Okay," she said quietly, "but you'll have to take me seriously. No shortcuts, no half measures. This isn't some quick fix. It's going to take time, effort, and faith." "I understand," Ethan said, relief washing over him. "Whatever it takes." With that, Ethan offered to take Mia back to his penthouse to discuss the details further. He assured her it wasn't out of charity but necessity. If they were going to pursue this unconventional route, they needed resources, books, research tools, access to experts. To his surprise, Mia agreed, though not without some reluctance. She eyed his luxury car warily, clearly uncomfortable with the idea of stepping into a world so foreign to her own. The ride to Ethan's penthouse was silent but charged with tension. Mia gazed out the window, taking in the towering skyscrapers and bustling streets below, while Ethan stole glances at her in the rearview mirror. Despite their vastly different lives, there was an unspoken understanding between them now, a shared determination to fight for Clara's life. When they arrived, Maya stepped cautiously into the opulent apartment, her eyes wide with awe. For someone who had spent years sleeping on sidewalks and surviving hand-to-mouth, the sheer extravagance of Ethan's home was overwhelming. But she didn't let it distract her for long. As soon as they sat down, she pulled out a worn notebook filled with scribbled notes and sketches, her grandmother's teachings, preserved in fragments. "This is everything I remember," Maya said, sliding the notebook toward Ethan. "Some of these herbs are rare, almost impossible to find. Others require specific preparation methods. But if we can gather them all—" Her voice trailed off, leaving the sentence unfinished but heavy with implication. Ethan's penthouse was a world unlike anything Mia had ever known. The gleaming marble floors, floor-to-ceiling windows offering breathtaking views of the city skyline, and sleek furniture screamed wealth and privilege. For someone who had spent most of her life scavenging for food and shelter, stepping into this luxurious space felt surreal, almost dreamlike. Yet, despite the opulence surrounding her, Maya didn't seem intimidated. Instead, she moved with quiet determination, her focus unwavering as she spread out her grandmother's notebook on the glass coffee table. Ethan watched her intently, marveling at how quickly she adapted to the situation. Most people would have been overwhelmed or distracted by their surroundings, but not Mia. She was here for one reason only: to honor her grandmother's legacy and perhaps to help save a stranger's wife. That kind of resolve impressed him more than he cared to admit. "This is where we start," Maya said, pointing to a page filled with faded handwriting and crude sketches of plants. "These are the herbs my grandmother used most often. Some grow in remote places, mountains, forests, even deserts. Others are harder to find because they've become rare due to overharvesting." Ethan leaned forward, studying the notes closely. The names of the herbs were unfamiliar, written in a mix of languages that hinted at their ancient origins. He realized immediately that this wasn't going to be easy. Finding these plants would require resources, expertise, and time, things he hadn't fully grasped when he first agreed to follow Mia's lead. But backing out wasn't an option. Not now. "I'll spare no expense," Ethan declared, his voice firm. "We'll hire botanists, researchers, anyone who can help us locate these herbs. Money isn't an issue." Mia raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "It's not just about money," she reminded him. "Some of these plants won't survive being transported carelessly. And even if we find them, preparing them correctly is just as important. One wrong step, and the whole thing could fail." Her words grounded him, pulling him back from the reckless optimism that had momentarily taken hold. She was right. Throwing money at the problem wouldn't magically solve it. This journey required patience, precision, and respect for the process, a lesson Ethan wasn't accustomed to learning. Over the next few hours, they mapped out a plan. Ethan called in his most trusted assistants, instructing them to assemble a team of experts in botany, ethnobotany, and traditional medicine. Meanwhile, Maya stayed by his side, guiding him through her grandmother's teachings and explaining the significance of each herb. She spoke passionately about the rituals involved, the importance of timing, intention, and connection to nature. It was clear that she viewed this not as a scientific endeavor, but as a spiritual one, deeply rooted in tradition and faith. As the night wore on, Ethan found himself drawn to Mia's perspective. In his world, success was measured by efficiency, results, and tangible outcomes. But Mia's approach reminded him of something he'd forgotten: the value of slowing down, listening, and trusting in forces beyond human control. Her belief in the power of these remedies reignited a spark of hope within him, a fragile but persistent flame. But doubts still lingered. What if they couldn't find all the herbs? What if the treatments didn't work? These questions haunted Ethan, lurking in the corners of his mind like shadows. Yet every time he glanced at Mia, her unwavering confidence reassured him. She seemed so certain that her grandmother's methods held answers, even if those answers weren't guaranteed. That certainty gave him strength, pushing him to keep moving forward despite the uncertainty. By the time dawn broke, Ethan's penthouse had transformed into a makeshift command center. Maps were pinned to walls, laptops hummed with activity, and phones rang constantly as teams were assembled and plans set into motion. For the first time in months, Ethan felt a sense of purpose, a mission to pour his energy into. He knew the road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges, but he also knew one thing for sure: he wasn't alone anymore. With Mia by his side, he had a partner who believed just as fiercely as he did in finding a way to save Clara. And so, with hope flickering like a candle in the darkness, Ethan took his first real step toward the unknown, a leap of faith guided by a street girl who refused to let the past fade away. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Ethan threw himself into the search with an intensity that surprised even his closest associates. Teams of botanists, researchers, and field experts fanned out across the globe, armed with Mia's notes and detailed descriptions of the herbs they needed to find. From the dense jungles of South America to the arid deserts of Africa, every lead was pursued with relentless determination. Meanwhile, back at the penthouse, Mia worked tirelessly alongside Ethan, teaching him more about her grandmother's methods and ensuring that nothing was overlooked. At first, progress seemed promising. Several of the herbs were identified and harvested relatively quickly, thanks to Maya's precise instructions and the vast network of resources Ethan could tap into. But as time went on, the challenges began to mount. Some plants proved nearly impossible to locate, their natural habitats destroyed by deforestation or climate change. Others required specific conditions to thrive: altitude, soil type, or seasonal timing that made extraction incredibly difficult. Each setback tested Ethan's resolve, chipping away at the fragile hope he had clung to since meeting Mia. Despite the mounting frustrations, Maya remained steadfast. She spent hours poring over her grandmother's notebook, double-checking details, and offering alternatives when certain herbs couldn't be found. Her calm demeanor acted as a counterbalance to Ethan's growing anxiety. When he paced the room late at night, muttering about wasted time and failed efforts, she would gently remind him why they were doing this, not for fame or fortune, but for love. For Clara. "You're not just fighting for your wife," Maya told him one evening as they sat together in the dimly lit living room. "You're fighting for something bigger than yourself. That's what gives you strength." Her words struck a chord deep within him. He realized then that this journey wasn't just about saving Clara. It was also about rediscovering who he was. Before all this, Ethan had been consumed by ambition, driven solely by the pursuit of success. Now he was learning the value of humility, patience, and trust in forces beyond his control. It was a humbling experience, one that forced him to confront his own limitations and vulnerabilities. Back at the hospital, Clara's condition continued to fluctuate. There were moments of improvement, small victories that gave them hope, but there were also setbacks that left Ethan feeling defeated. Every visit was bittersweet. Seeing her smile brought him joy, but knowing how much she was suffering broke his heart. He shared updates with Mia regularly, showing her photos and videos of Clara from happier times. Slowly, Mia began to understand why Ethan was willing to go to such lengths for her. Clara wasn't just his wife. She was his anchor, the person who kept him grounded and reminded him of what truly mattered. As weeks turned into months, the strain began to show on both of them. Ethan's once impeccable appearance grew disheveled, his tailored suits replaced by casual clothes, stained with coffee spills and dirt from expeditions. Dark circles formed under his eyes, a testament to countless sleepless nights spent worrying and planning. Mia, too, looked weary, her youthful energy tempered by the weight of responsibility she carried. Yet, neither of them gave up. They leaned on each other during the hardest moments, finding solace in their shared mission. One particularly grueling day, after receiving news that yet another herb had eluded their search, Ethan collapsed onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. "What if we're wrong, Mia?" he asked, his voice heavy with doubt. "What if none of this works? All this effort, all this money, what if it's for nothing?" Mia sat beside him, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Then at least you'll know you did everything you could," she said softly. "And sometimes that's enough. You can't control the outcome, Ethan. All you can do is try your best and believe." Her words didn't erase his fears, but they steadied him, reminding him why he had started this journey in the first place. Love, faith, hope. These weren't abstract concepts. They were lifelines, keeping him afloat in the stormy seas of uncertainty. By the end of the 5th month, they had managed to gather most of the herbs, though 2 remained elusive. The pressure was mounting, and time was running out. Still, Ethan refused to give up. With Mia by his side, he held on to the belief that miracles could happen, even in the unlikeliest of places. And so, they pressed on, determined to see their mission through to the end, no matter how daunting the odds. The 6th month of their journey brought a mix of hope and despair, like walking a tightrope over an endless abyss. Ethan and Mia had come so far. Dozens of herbs collected, countless hours spent deciphering ancient rituals, and teams scattered across the globe working tirelessly. Yet 2 critical ingredients remained missing, and the clock was ticking louder than ever. Clara's health was deteriorating rapidly, and the weight of failure loomed heavier with each passing day. Doubts began to creep in, not just for Ethan, but for everyone involved. Critics, who had always been skeptical of his unconventional approach, grew bolder in their ridicule. Articles appeared online questioning Ethan's sanity, calling him naive for abandoning modern medicine in favor of witchcraft. Even some of his closest colleagues started whispering behind his back, wondering if he'd let desperation cloud his judgment. The pressure was suffocating, and it wasn't just external. Ethan could feel doubt gnawing at his own resolve. One evening, as they reviewed progress reports in the penthouse, Maya finally voiced what she'd likely been thinking for weeks. "What if I'd led you astray?" she asked quietly, her voice trembling. "What if my grandmother's remedies aren't enough? Or worse, what if they don't work at all?" Ethan looked up from the papers spread across the table, surprised by the vulnerability in her tone. For someone who had always seemed so sure of herself, this admission felt raw and unexpected. He realized then that Mia carried her own burden. The fear of disappointing him, of failing Clara, and perhaps most painfully, of dishonoring her grandmother's legacy. "You haven't led me astray," Ethan said firmly, meeting her gaze. "You've given me something no one else could, hope. And even if we don't succeed, I'll never regret trying." His words seemed to steady her, but the tension between them didn't fully dissipate. They both knew the stakes were too high to ignore the possibility of failure. Every missed lead, every dead end, felt like another nail in the coffin of their fragile optimism. Then came the breakthrough, or at least the hint of one. A research team stationed in the Himalayas sent word that they had located a remote village where one of the elusive herbs was said to grow abundantly. According to local legends, the plant thrived only in the harshest conditions, clinging to life on cliffsides battered by wind and snow. It was a long shot, but it was the best lead they'd had in months. Ethan immediately arranged for transportation, determined to oversee the extraction himself. Mia insisted on joining him, arguing that her knowledge of the herb's preparation would be crucial once they retrieved it. Reluctantly, he agreed, knowing how much this mission meant to her. The journey to the Himalayas was grueling. The altitude made breathing difficult, and the terrain tested their endurance. At one point, Ethan slipped on a patch of ice, narrowly avoiding a fall that could have ended their expedition right there. But through it all, Maya remained steadfast, guiding the team with quiet authority. Her familiarity with her grandmother's teachings proved invaluable as they navigated treacherous paths and consulted wary villagers who guarded their secrets closely. When they finally reached the cliffs where the herb grew, Ethan felt a surge of triumph, but also humility. The plant was small and unassuming, its delicate leaves shimmering faintly in the sunlight. To anyone else, it might have looked ordinary, but to Ethan and Mia, it represented months of struggle, sacrifice, and unwavering belief. As they carefully harvested the herb, Mia turned to Ethan with tears in her eyes. "This is it," she whispered. "We're close now. So close." But even as they celebrated this victory, a shadow lingered in Ethan's mind. One final herb still eluded them, and time was running out faster than ever. Back at the hospital, Clara's condition had worsened, leaving doctors baffled and Ethan terrified. Would they find the last piece of the puzzle in time, or would all their efforts prove futile? Despite the uncertainty, Ethan refused to let despair take hold. With Mia by his side, he clung to the fragile thread of hope that had carried them this far. Together, they prepared to face whatever lay ahead, knowing that every step forward was a testament to love, resilience, and the unshakable human spirit. The final herb proved to be the most elusive of all. It wasn't just rare, it was practically mythical, mentioned only in fragments of folklore and whispered legends. According to Mia's grandmother's notes, it grew deep within a dense rainforest in South America, hidden beneath layers of thick undergrowth and protected by indigenous tribes who viewed outsiders with suspicion. The challenge wasn't just finding the herb, it was earning the trust of those who guarded its secrets. Ethan and Mia wasted no time assembling a small team for the expedition. They knew they couldn't approach this like their previous searches. This required respect, patience, and cultural sensitivity. Armed with Mia's knowledge and Ethan's resources, they traveled to the edge of the rainforest, where they met with local guides willing to help them navigate the treacherous terrain. But even these seasoned experts warned them. The forest doesn't give up its treasures easily. For days, they trudged through mud-soaked paths, swatted away swarms of insects, and endured the oppressive humidity that clung to their skin like a second layer. At night, they camped under makeshift shelters, listening to the eerie symphony of nocturnal creatures echoing through the trees. Exhaustion weighed heavily on everyone, but Mia refused to slow down. She carried her grandmother's notebook everywhere, consulting it constantly, as if drawing strength from its pages. On the 5th day, they encountered the first sign of the tribe, a series of intricately carved wooden posts marking the boundary of their territory. Ethan felt a pang of unease as they approached, knowing how delicate this moment was. If they offended the tribe, their journey would end here. With Mia translating what little she could remember of her grandmother's teachings about respecting sacred lands, they offered gifts of food and handmade crafts, symbols of goodwill and humility. To their relief, the tribe allowed them entry after hours of deliberation. An elder, his face lined with age but sharp with wisdom, agreed to guide them to the area where the herbs supposedly grew. He spoke softly, warning them not to disturb the balance of nature or take more than they needed. "This plant is life," he said solemnly, "and life must always be honored." When they finally found the herb, nestled among twisting roots and vibrant greenery, Ethan felt a surge of emotion so powerful it nearly brought him to his knees. This was it, the last piece of the puzzle. Carefully, Mia knelt beside the plant, whispering a prayer before harvesting a small portion. Her hands trembled as she placed it into a protective pouch, treating it with reverence. Back at the penthouse, preparations began immediately. Using Mia's grandmother's methods, they combined the herbs into a treatment tailored specifically for Clara. Traditional rituals were woven into the process, blending ancient practices with modern medical techniques. Ethan worked alongside doctors and researchers, ensuring every step adhered to both scientific standards and spiritual traditions. When the treatment was ready, Ethan sat by Clara's bedside, holding her hand as the first dose was administered. Days passed in agonizing suspense, each hour stretching longer than the last. Then, slowly but surely, changes began to appear. Her fever subsided, her breathing steadied, and color returned to her cheeks. Doctors marveled at the improvement, unable to explain it fully but unwilling to dismiss the evidence before them. One morning, Clara opened her eyes and smiled weakly at Ethan. "You did it," she murmured, her voice barely audible but filled with gratitude. Tears streamed down Ethan's face as he hugged her tightly, overwhelmed by relief and joy. In that moment, he realized the true magnitude of what they had accomplished, not just saving Clara, but rediscovering the power of faith, resilience, and human connection. Maya stood quietly in the doorway, watching the reunion with a bittersweet smile. She had fulfilled her promise to honor her grandmother's legacy, but now she wondered what came next for her. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of purpose, and perhaps a glimpse of hope for her own future. The aftermath of Clara's recovery brought a profound shift in Ethan's life, one that went far beyond the joy of having his wife back. For months, he had been consumed by desperation, pouring every ounce of his energy into saving her. But now, with Clara slowly regaining her strength and vitality, Ethan found himself reflecting on everything they had endured, the highs, the lows, and the lessons learned along the way. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about transformation. One evening, as the three of them, Ethan, Clara, and Mia, sat together in the penthouse overlooking the city lights, Ethan made an announcement that caught both women off guard. "I've decided to start a foundation," he said, his voice steady but filled with conviction. "A foundation dedicated to preserving traditional healing practices and funding research into alternative medicines. What we've discovered through this journey is too important to keep to ourselves. Clara smiled softly, reaching out to squeeze his hand. She had always known Ethan as a man driven by ambition, but she saw something different in him now, a deeper sense of purpose, one rooted in gratitude and compassion. Mia, on the other hand, looked surprised, almost hesitant. "Are you sure?" she asked quietly. "This isn't just some trend or phase for you." Ethan shook his head firmly. "No, Mia, this is real. Your grandmother's wisdom saved my wife's life. If there are others like her, with knowledge that could help people, we need to protect it, share it, and make sure it doesn't disappear." Mia nodded slowly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. She had never imagined that her grandmother's teachings would reach so far, let alone inspire someone like Ethan Caldwell to dedicate his resources to preserving them. For years, she had carried the weight of her family's legacy alone, fearing it might fade into obscurity. Now she felt a renewed sense of hope, not just for herself, but for countless others who might benefit from these ancient practices. With Mia's guidance, Ethan launched the foundation, naming it the Bridge Initiative, a nod to the connection between modern science and age-old traditions. They traveled to remote villages, meeting healers and documenting their methods, ensuring their work was done ethically and respectfully. The initiative quickly gained attention, drawing support from medical professionals, researchers, and even skeptics who were intrigued by its success stories. Mia became a key figure in the organization, not just as an advisor, but as a symbol of resilience and cultural preservation. As time went on, Ethan and Clara rebuilt their lives, cherishing every moment together. Their relationship deepened, strengthened by the trials they had faced. Ethan no longer measured success by wealth or achievements. Instead, he found fulfillment in simple joys, watching the sunrise with Clara, sharing laughter over dinner, and knowing they still had a future to look forward to. For Mia, life took a new direction as well. With Ethan's help, she enrolled in school, determined to learn more about botany and medicine, so she could honor her grandmother's legacy in even greater ways. Though she missed the simplicity of her old life in some ways, she embraced this new chapter with courage and determination. Ethan and Clara became her family, offering her not just financial stability, but emotional support and unconditional love. Months later, during a quiet evening at the penthouse, Ethan raised a glass to toast their journey. "To second chances," he said, his voice warm with emotion. "To faith when all seems lost, and to the people who remind us what truly matters." Clara and Mia joined him, clinking their glasses together. In that moment, none of them needed words to express how much they had changed, and how much they had grown because of each other. What had started as a chance encounter between a broken billionaire and a street girl had blossomed into something extraordinary, a testament to the power of hope, resilience, and human connection. And so their story continued, not as individuals, but as a united force, committed to making the world a little brighter, one healing step at a time.